if you don't have this unique brand positioning and you're still using the industry playbook, how are you going to beat the competitor at their own game, right? You can't turn the dial up enough to compete with them on their own terms. That's where they hit the big growth ceiling.
A lot of B2B companies think they have a marketing problem. They don't. They have a who are we problem. Most brands describe themselves by their industry, but the real question is, who are you fighting for? And who won't you accept? Today, we talk about what happens when a brand finally answers that. Hey there, and welcome to episode 2 of the Challenger Brand Podcast. We are excited for another round of exciting talking about what are challenger brands? Who are challenger brands? Are you a challenger brand? In this second episode, we're building on our first episode, which is we asked, what is a challenger brand? And today we're asking, are you a challenger brand? So most B2B companies think they have a positioning problem, and honestly, they don't. They have a real identity problem. You know, I got my identity stolen. We see the commercials about it. And then brands stop defining themselves until a brand stops defining itself by its industry and starts defining itself by who it's fighting for and what it refuses to accept. Marketing decisions that follow will produce category average results. So that this episode, we're really going to dive into the moment that shift happens, what changes when it does, right? So, all right, let's jump in here. So let's talk about the identity trap, Shannon. Most B2B companies, and I want you to jump in here, are define themselves by their category. We're a SaaS company. We're a tech company. We serve manufacturing, very industry first identity problems, and it feels safe. It's logical. It fits nicely into a filing cabinet. But it's that mechanism that makes challengers invisible, right? So Shannon, talk to me about that. We were just talking about some stages, right? And life cycle framing. What's really there in terms of the arc?
Yeah. It feels like it's mitigating risk to copy what everybody else is doing in the space, or some of the successful incumbents in the space, right? Reverse engineering what they do. And I don't think that's all bad in all stages. And I think what helps here is to think about the stages of growth that a brand goes through, because I think that sort of industry first idea where you're following that industry playbook makes sense in the early stages of growth. But once you get specifically into the challenger stage is where I think it becomes a liability. So, if you think about the stages of growth, what I have in my head is this book called Crossing the Chasm. Lots of people are familiar with this, the product life cycle, or the innovation, the stages of innovation.
Yep.
And that goes from, let's see if I remember this correctly, I think from innovator to early adopter to early majority to late majority to laggard, right? And it's on a bell curve, and there's this concept of this chasm right before you make the leap into the early majority.
Yeah.
And so this is kind of the metaphor. I think brands go through something similar where there's also a chasm, where the early stages of the brand growth, which I would call an entrant, moving to a contender, then moving to challenger, and then finally to category leader. And I think in that entrant and contender stage, the industry playbooks can work pretty well. And the reason is because those are early stages. The brand is smaller. They don't have really very much working capital to reinvest into marketing.
Yeah.
And so they really need very cost-effective strategies, and they need to sort of come up to a standard, right? They're just kind of working to, get to viability and legitimacy. in their marketing.
Yeah.
And so 90% of the agencies that are out there are really built for these stages, right? Because if you think about the number of companies that are in each of those categories, it's all the volume is in the entrant and the contender stages, right? And then it gets very narrow when you move into challenger, and then the few that are at the top, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's a time and place for it, but specifically when you're trying to get from that contender stage to the challenger, where you really are going after market share to take market share from those industry incumbents, those big category leaders, that's where it tends to break down, because it's in direct opposition to the approach that the challenger needs to take, right? Which is highly differentiated. They're fighting the status quo. They need to go out and be bold and have a point of view that they need to, unapologetically champion.
Yeah.
And just repeating, or copycatting what everybody else is doing in the space is exactly what will keep you stuck when you try to move to that challenger stage.
Shan, help me understand this a little more practically. Like, if I'm a marketing director, I've been a marketing, my first time being a marketing director, and I'm like, okay, that all makes sense. But like my customers or leads, they're on Google, they're on Google Ads or something like that, right? So I'm thinking, well, I'm a contender and I don't have a budget that the big enterprises have. Like, talk to me about give me an example of, like, when we think about taking the strategy to an execution step, what are good things to mimic, right? Because again, like you said, we're trying to reduce risk, right? We say they probably spent millions of dollars on conversion rate optimization. So maybe it is sometimes good to mimic, a framework or something, but there's the opposite end, which is, like you said, differentiation. We cannot just copycat our way into that top spot, right? You eventually have to speak to the weaknesses, to the gaps, to, what's that differentiating thing. So talk to me about that dichotomy there. Like, where do people, how should they strike that balance?
Yeah, well, obviously there are channels that brands need to activate on that are going to be consistent across probably all these stages.
Yeah.
So it's not so much in saying that, you're not going to be activating via, paid search or paid social or doing SEO or some of those things.
Yeah.
But I think probably the first pivot is probably with the messaging, and with really having a clear sort of anti-status quo point of view, where you're really understanding what isn't working in the industry space that's owned, in majority by these big incumbents, and then being able to really build your brand around those unmet needs, those areas where the status quo isn't working. And one distinction to make here is that I think a lot of people might think, well, if to be a challenger, that means I'm going for a slice of the entire market. And that's not the case, right? You're still, as a challenger, looking for those underserved segments that are being served by the incumbents, but they're just not doing a very good job of it, right?
Yeah.
They're sort of the forgotten segments that are just, they're doing it because, their brand is ubiquitous. They don't feel like they have other options, or they don't know that there's a better solution and approach for them.
Yeah. One of my favorite examples of this is liquid death. I can think of no more boring industry to try to take a category in, which is water. And these guys in the last 10 years have just completely, they're selling water. They're selling spring water. It's nothing new. It's just like, right? But they took this brand approach of, this dark, almost like death centric perspective on different flavors and things. And it really captivated a group of people saying, wow, now I don't think people out there are like, oh my God, liquid death's water is so much better than other waters. It's pretty, marginally the same, right? But they made value right out of being this contender over time. But they wouldn't have got where they were by just imitating Dasani. But
yeah, they're a great challenger story though, for sure.
Exactly. So
yeah.
Sorry, did you want to respond to that?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to break down the stages a little bit.
Yes.
A little bit more in depth if we can do that, because it kind of goes to this question that we're here to answer, which is, are you a challenger brand, or which stage of that brand growth journey are you in as a brand? So I think this is a good starting point. So I've broke this down into 4 categories. Somebody could probably argue this is an oversimplification. There's probably more. I know for me, like, I think of early challengers and late challengers. There's probably also some other subsets of these, but the first stage is the entrant. So these are startups that are really vying for their first customers.
Yeah.
And most of us remember that, either with the company that we're in, or we were involved in a startup at one point in our career. But your goal at that stage is to really prove that your product works and secure low-hanging fruit, right? That's really what you're looking for, low-hanging fruit. And if you're bootstrapping at that stage, then you really probably don't have any semblance of a marketing engine. You don't really have a budget. You're really probably running on founder energy and tapping personal networks just to get off the ground, right? You're looking for those early adopters. And the exception to this, though, can be when there's financial backing, which can sort of accelerate the process there, because the purpose, especially at that early stage of the financial backing, is usually to accelerate to getting to a viable product, but also sometimes to support the go-to-market activity that would otherwise, be out of reach, at least until you would get to the contender stage, right? Yeah. And since the new entrant really starts with virtually nothing, the first marketing investment that's made usually just needs to be deployed towards foundational marketing assets, things that are just going to give me some kind of proof or legitimacy to those early customers.
Yeah.
So I think we can probably all pretty much relate to that. The next stage, contender, would be just past that, right? When these are companies that have achieved some level of like a product market fit. Usually they've found a niche that they are starting to get traction in. They've gotten to a certain level of sustainable profitability. One of the characteristics that they have is that they're probably at a place where they're starting to max out or exhaust where they can go with the founder energy.
Yeah.
And the founder's starting to feel like a bottleneck. And what typically happens at this stage is the investment in sort of that low cost industry playbook marketing is where they're at, right? They have enough profitability that they can start to do some of these marketing things, and the only real pathway for the contender is highly cost effective marketing. And so this is something that we talk about a lot, and I want to just describe this a little bit more if I can. So a lot of agents, usually this is an agency play, because again, at the contender stage, you don't have the resources. You can't bring that in house. The marketing function is too complex to do that. And so, you work with an agency that has developed a playbook. And this is the way they deliver that at an affordable rate for the new entrants and contenders is it something that's repeatable, right? I call it checklist marketing or conveyor belt marketing, which sounds derogatory, but for these stages, it's actually what you need to do, right? because again, you're just trying to get to some baseline of web presence and visibility in some niche markets. And, in the industry that you're in, a lot of agencies have solved this, and they've made it turnkey.
Yeah.
So again, that works there, but now getting to the challenger stage, this is defined by where the predominant growth opportunity is really to steal market share from the large category leaders.
Yeah.
And so you're trying to move up market. This is the way this normally works, is you exhaust some of these niche markets and you want the more profitable customers, the bigger customers that are more sophisticated. They're the ones that are giving their money to the big incumbents because they tend to gravitate toward enterprise type solutions. They're bigger companies, and so they need that stability factor.
Yeah.
And challengers really start to experience the gap here, right? Because they haven't made the investments in their brand. They haven't made the investments in their systems to be able to target the right people at the right time and speak in a relevant way. They just don't have this infrastructure, and they don't have the brand presence to go up to against the category leader. And what they tend to do is if you don't have this unique brand positioning and you're still using the industry playbook, how are you going to beat the competitor at their own game, right? You can't turn the dial up enough to compete with them on their own terms.
No.
Right. And that's where they hit the big growth ceiling.
Yeah.
And then everybody knows what the leader position is. So we don't need to spend too much time on that. But I do think within the challenger space, there's probably early challengers and later challengers. That's one sort of nuance. If you're just entering that challenger category, then or stage, that's where you need to shore up these gaps in the brand strategy and positioning. A little bit later, when you're a later challenger, you've probably figured those things out, and and then you're really going for more bold, disruptive types of things where you actually do have the resources to put out. This reminds me of my days at T-Mobile, right? We were a challenger brand with 30 million customers, right? So definitely had resources to do national TV ads and this sort of thing, which is not always the case with the early challengers.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, I appreciate where you delineated on the challenger is, what is the thinking of a challenger when the same thinking cannot be applied as an entrant and contender as a challenger, or you're never gonna get to that category leader position, right? And I think we see that almost as the cost of industry first thinking, or the cost of thinking as a someone who's lower in the stages, right, in your brand growth, right? So let's unpack that a little bit. Like what industry first identity actually produces? Is it maybe messaging that mirrors incumbents? You mentioned something like that, the imitation being a highest form of flattery, but it's not going to take that spot, right? Content that looks like every other category, or value props that are built for niches that no longer fit where you're trying to reach, right? So talk to me a little bit about that cost of industry first thinking. You started leading with that, but yeah, especially in the AI era, like we're seeing all of the same information kind of recirculating, right? But yeah, I'd love for you to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think of two things actually. There's the playbook. So we talked about the industry playbook, which is really built on that sort of mimicking of what tends to work generically across the category, right? This is what we see most players, or the successful ones. This is what they're doing. They're showing up in these channels. They're, doing this kind of a marketing mix. They're they've got these kinds of offers, right, et cetera, et cetera. But then there's the brand positioning and messaging, which is the other component. And so I think you can start to see how early challengers hit a ceiling when, number one, they're coming off of an industry playbook approach. So they're not differentiating there, right? They're trying to do the same things, but with less budget. And that's, again, a game that they're not going to win. And then if now enter on the other side, so the brand positioning and messaging, if you're using AI in the wrong way, in other words, you're feeling, you're trying to white knuckle this thing and say, like, I've got to do more because that's what's happening. The bar is just continually being raised by the productivity that AI is giving us. And so you're shooting out content is more just turning that dial up, but without any real brand governance or guiding philosophy or ethos behind it. You've got lots of random people, internal sales and marketing folks, external vendors, all just basically contributing to chaos and fragmentation. And so this is not, so now you have two things where you're really not, you're not doing what the market needs, what it needs to cut through, right? There's this, have you heard of the Great Flattening? I think the term originated with what happens, in organizations. Like structures in organizations, but I'm seeing the term being used now in reference to brands. And so where AI is basically making all brands sound alike. It's just creating the average. And that's, that's what the LLMs do. And for a while I was saying, well, this is probably going to change. Like AI is going to get better, right? Like it's moving fast, it's evolving fast. But that's actually not what's happening right now. I've been reading some things where actually this homogenization is getting worse, and the reason is because more and more brands are producing more and more content that is originated by LLMs, and so the raw data, the material that it's using to create this average of what it sees out there is just it's an echo chamber. So again, maybe they'll figure that out. I'm sure they probably will, and it'll probably get bad maybe before it gets better. But yeah, that's the cost of the industry first, and couple that with AI technology. It's just sort of amplifying the homogenization.
For those there's different tiers of AI in people's AI adoption. I'm sure some of the people probably watching this probably either use Claude or ChatGPT or Perplexity to some degree in their day-to-day workflow. I mean, what kind of advice would you give to these guys or to these people that are, building their, brand differentiator documents, just if you could sum it up in in a sentence or two, what would you tell them so that they can avoid this homogenization?
Yeah, I'll do a 2-word sentence. Human first.
Okay, elaborate.
So I would just advise to really to have your especially if you're doing like thought leadership, but even writing content that's like branded content. Originate it with human voice, and use your subject matter experts internally to be the originators. So this idea of human in the loop was kind of hilarious to me even the first time I heard it. Because it makes sense, right? People, the first thing that people recognize is like, well, we can't just publish stuff that AI generates without having a human come in and it was and make it sound more human, right? We noticed that there were AI tells, there were certain things that AI did, and people could could detect them and so forth. So it's like, okay, we need a human in the loop.
Yeah.
Right. But that still implies that the human's at the end of the process, right? Or somewhere in the loop. And I would say we need to be thinking about having the human at the beginning of the process. So when we do thought leadership with our clients, and for Rocket Ship, for example, we start with content like what we're doing right here through an interview process.
Yeah.
Where we're talking and sharing our ideas, and then we can use that as raw content and have AI flow it out, or make some edits, or add some statistics, or do a lot of things that are still very value added and time saving.
Yeah.
But I think it's just really crucial for brands to start with the human aspect. I think there's a day coming, and we're already doing it actually, but I think it's gonna get better, where we'll be able to train our AI systems and agents to really know the brand voice, right? I know that people are uploading brand guidelines and that sort of thing, but that's just really not enough. There has to be deep training. You have to have enough of a human originated knowledge base that your AI tools can work off of, so that it doesn't have to go out and use and fill it in with too much of the default content that it's homogenizing, right?
Totally.
So we definitely see some benefit when we do this, but it takes more time than you would expect. You can't just throw it a brand guidelines and a couple of pieces of content, right? You have to really build it out and train it over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. I love that. So you mentioned pivoting your mindset, right? So how do we go from that great flattening, right? We talked about getting away from this industry first thinking, right? So talk to me. Let's have a jam session here. How do we pivot a mindset? So what needs to change when a brand stops competing inside a category and starts competing against a specific incumbent, right? The question, I feel like it starts to shift from how do we reach this industry to who are we here for and what are we willing to lose, right? So what happens with this mindset pivot, Shannon? Like how do we become the challenger brand, or better yet, how do I identify if I am a challenger brand when it comes to that mindset pivot, right?
Yeah. Well, you're right in pointing out that one of the first things is you kind of need to be more aware of. Well, let me actually back up. It's a brand positioning issue.
Yeah.
Brand positioning, of course, has an awareness of the competitive landscape.
Yeah.
Right. That's part of the positioning process. You have to know how your competitors are sitting in the market, and where there's an open positioning for you to own as a brand. So in that sense, you have to be aware of your competitors. But I would kind of push back on the idea of it might be natural to think that if I'm a challenger, that means I have to go toe to toe with a competitor and take them on head on, right? Yeah. Certainly you see examples of that, but I don't really think it's the best strategy for most brands. I think it's really more about identifying. You hear this talk about like identifying the villain, right? This is language from StoryBrand.
Donald Miller, shout out.
Donald Miller. It's sometimes called the monster strategy. It's the same idea, right? Yeah. But the way to think about that is to think about your villain as being the status quo.
Yeah.
And so what you're really fighting against is the status quo, the thing that is, subpar, suboptimal, is not serving the needs of certain segments within the space. Yeah. And then by association, you're taking on your competitors in that way, but you're not necessarily attacking them head on.
Yeah.
So that's the first sort of mindset shift, I think, is to get really aware of, what's going on in that market space, and I mean, one of the positioning constructs that I like is, this simplifies it, but you've heard of free, perfect, now.
Yeah.
That idea, sort of these three dimensions, where you're going towards really, well, the extreme position is free, but it's price value, or perfect, which is the sort of the product quality, and now, which is sort of the convenience or customer experience aspect.
Yeah.
And so, you're looking for areas in the market where there's a need for some set of those features, right? Because nobody can do all three. That's the idea. You can maybe get two of them, but not all three of them. And you're finding where there's an unmet need within the market, in the broader market.
Yeah.
And so that mindset is to find out where that is, and then find out where and how that intersects with your product competitive advantages, right? You want to find that overlap. Yeah. And then once you find that, you want to really, the next shift in mindset is to move from, homogenized, safe messaging and move to much more bold or even exclusionary messaging, right?
Yeah.
You want to own that, that position. And you can't do that with weak diluted messaging, right?
Yeah.
So, that's another hard shift, and I said earlier that challengers, don't really want to try to attack the whole broad market. Your job is to identify those subsegments, and that can be hard for challengers to give up and be unapologetic about, we serve this group at the exclusion of some others.
Yeah.
But you can't be all things to all people. And in the challenger space, it's really important that you're able to own that position. Otherwise, it won't be believable.
This kind of fun side question. Do you think there are any companies in the world that are all three? Like Apple and Amazon kind of come to my mind. Like, have they achieved free perfect now? I mean,
Apple isn't. Apple is definitely not the. I mean, you could say from a value standpoint, they deliver a lot of value, but it's certainly not a low cost option in the market.
Totally. Amazon came to my mind though. It's like fast free shipping on millions of well rated, high quality products that you get delivered next day. I mean, like that's their elevator pitch, and I feel like it hits almost everything. Now, obviously, it's not a luxury. It's not a luxury product. Usually, you think of, no speed, but high quality, and a value of time, sometimes the value of time with like luxury goods. So maybe that, but I was thinking about that the other day. I was like, is Amazon all three possibly? Is that why they own the world basically in e-commerce? So, yeah, but who knows? So
hard to come up in e-commerce, and to tackle that. But I mean, you think about like brands like Wayfair, which is just sort of more focused, and so they have a wider range of products within a particular category.
Yeah.
So there's I think when you drill in at the segment level is where you would start to see that maybe Amazon doesn't have all three.
Yeah.
Of those things at the same level when you're talking about a narrow segment versus the broad market.
Yeah, totally.
One other really difficult thing that should be pointed out here in terms of mindset is the challenger really needs to be authentic in this this positioning that they own.
Yeah.
And so this to really be authentic means that it really needs to come out of the ethos of the company. It can't just be a superficial marketing message, right? And in order for it to be authentic, people have to, they can see, they can tell when it's inauthentic, and that then goes back to like the culture.
Yeah.
And then the culture goes back to the values. And sometimes I think, especially those early challengers, they've just been so focused on survival, and that many of these things have just fallen by the wayside, right? They haven't built their brand, and they probably haven't really invested in culture and mission. So this is a kind of a reckoning probably that has to happen if a brand is really serious about entering that stage of the market to be a challenger. Do they have that foundation built? And if they don't, that's just not something that you can just go off in a weekend offsite and come out the other side. It has to be more genuine and rooted than that. So
yeah. One brand that comes to mind about that is REI. They're like this enormous brand, but when you think of REI, you think of like they take care of the world. Same thing with like Patagonia. Like you think of the type of people that work at these places, the type of people that like to shop at these places and support them. And I mean, they aren't small brands by any means. I mean, they have enormous market share, but they're incredibly authentic. They're very transparent about where their money goes, how they reinvest back into the industries that they support, like, national forests and, reducing their carbon footprint and things like that. It's really cool to see, and it's really telling of capitalism, right? It's like, the market shifts where, people support what they align their beliefs with. Right. So yeah, it's cool to see it out in the wild of that authenticity really winning in certain markets. And it really does win, you see people, where people begin to leak on these things and it starts to erode them. Right. But they just withstand the test of time. So
that's a really great point, especially on the, in our free market system, brands do what the market demands, right? Yep. And so it's great to see that generationally the expectation is starting to shift towards brands that do have more of a purpose and that align with values and this sort of thing. So in the challenger brand space, this is called a lighthouse identity.
Yeah.
I think I saw some stats. I can't remember from where, but it was just talking about how authenticity is really the key. It's like twice as important towards people, what people think about brands and their perception of brands than just that they have a cause that's aligned with their values, and this is rooted in the fact that over half of people are inherently skeptical about brands doing their corporate responsibility initiatives, and that they see it as marketing.
Yeah.
So to bridge that gap, right, it has to be really genuine, and this is potentially some hard work for brands that are trying to move into that challenger brand space, because they have to have it, but it's also a huge opportunity for them, because they can really be more genuine about it or be more convincing about it than some of the big brands a lot of times.
Yeah. Shannon, dig a little deeper for me on this lighthouse identity, right? We talked about it a little bit in the first episode, but like a lighthouse assumes, lighthouses are firm, they stand still, they project light, they navigate those around them, right? So for challenger brands, how does a lighthouse operate as a mechanism for them? Like we're already talking about this authenticity thing. It goes part and parcel with those things, right? So yeah, talk to me more about that, because I think that's really intriguing, especially as you're saying the authenticity, the trust. It's a huge component of being in that challenger brand stage.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all the things that we've been talking about, right? I mean, the metaphor of the lighthouse is really like it's a beacon, and it draws people to you. And the way brands do it is by being very clear and unapologetic about who they are, right?
Yeah.
Not caring if it alienates some buyers, maybe even especially if it does.
Yeah.
And so, but obviously that takes commitment.
Yeah.
And it's one of the biggest gaps that I see. And you know, how many brands really have that versus this just fragmentation and complete chaos of messaging that ends up, you know, hitting the market.
Yeah.
So it requires commitment, but it requires knowing who you are. And again, it's very difficult to make it stick if it is not really embedded deeply into the ethos of the company and the culture of the company. That's how it happens, and that's why we're just talking about it.
Yeah.
You know,
go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to add one other thing, kind of toward a previous point that I made, which is how consumers can really they sense the difference between, you know, purpose washing and, you know, true purpose that's authentic.
Yeah.
There was I'd read recently that purpose driven brands grew profit by 31% compared to 3% of brands that were not purpose driven. So that's a huge, you know, this has been publicized. And so you can see where when executives read that, they go, oh, well, I guess we need to have a purpose campaign or we need to do a give back campaign or something like that. But that doesn't cut it, right? It's gotta be at the root.
Yeah. You said a moment ago, they just kind of do it one off. They do it a campaign or something like that. But it really is interesting. And I mean, I know Donald Miller goes into this a lot in his own story brand approach. But like, once you have that purpose, or once you have that elevator pitch or whatever that is, it's like it's just saying it over and over and over again, right? And oftentimes, what I see happening is people just say it 5 times and then they're like, well, I guess it didn't stick, you know, and like maybe they didn't resonate, right? It's like, you know, but it really does take years and years of just saying it over and over again. It's like some people who are close to it say that's we've heard that 1,000 times, right? But you know, people who are in the outer fringes, like maybe there's their very first time hearing it, right? So once you've found that identity, or once you've found that, like, what that positioning is as a lighthouse, it seems like very often the brands that are winning on purpose, with a purpose, right, are finding themselves repeating the same thing over and over again, and they found it to be true. It resonates with their staff, it resonates with their customer base, right? So there's a shift, right, that happens becoming that lighthouse, becoming in that mindset, right? We talked about the mindset shift. So what does it look like after you've had that identity shift? Talk to me about that, because I think people are wondering now, okay, we're there. We've shifted our identity. Now what? What's supposed to happen, or what are the implications?
Yeah, well, so I think some of the foundational work, as this is kind of a segue in from what we were just talking about, which is defining the values in the culture and making it authentic.
Yeah.
And so that for many brands is going to be the starting point.
Yeah.
I mean, the good news is for early challengers, right? You have the ability to do this before you may have a broader brand identity. You know, you still have the opportunity to shape your brand as you start to move into the challenger space, because as a contender, you probably still don't have a very, very broad market awareness yet.
Yeah.
And so this is the time to do it, right? Rather than waiting, because of what we talked about. If you wait or you don't do it and then you try to tack it on later, it's not going to come across as authentic.
Yeah.
So that's thing number one. Secondly, doing the competitive and the positioning work to find those underserved segments and identify those unmet needs that you're going to attach to, and build your build your lighthouse identity around. Then I would say moving into like brand messaging strategy. And so this is again another area where most early challengers don't have enough meat on the bones. They might have crafted a value proposition or even defined a persona, but this needs to go much deeper, right, into things like narrative and your different ICPs, and the different buyer personas that you have within each ICP can sometimes be very different in terms of how you need to talk to them to be relevant, understanding their needs and pain points and so forth. And that can be some work, but it's also an area where AI can really help. Right? Pre-AI, you could have brand guidelines and you would write up your persona sheets, but to message at that granular of a level to multiple personas across their various buying stages is cumbersome, right? But AI can make it less cumbersome. And then finally, just looking at your go-to-market plan and just reassessing that, where should you be investing based on the resources that you have, right? Because you want to weigh things like you don't want to dilute your message, you don't want to spread too thin, and obviously knowing where your key buyer personas, where they're getting their information at which stages of the buying journey. Do you invest more mid funnel, bottom of funnel, top, middle, bottom? Like, those are all questions that are unique for each situation, and really based on your, the amount of resource that you can deploy. So
that's great. That's really, really good. Shannon, to really tie us off here, the question of the segment is, or this episode is, are you a challenger brand, right? So as people are hearing this, as they're walking away, talk to me, maybe a couple of questions people can be asking themselves. How does a brand know if it's actually made the shift or just added challenger language to the same incumbent style positioning? I mean, what is there a diagnostic or some assessment questions that we can offer maybe those listening to see if they've made that shift?
Yeah, I would say, are you ready to be bold and unapologetic about who you're going for? Who's that specific buyer, and are you willing to really fight for them and at the exclusion of others? Are you willing to make those trade-offs? I would say, have you come to a place of realizing that your primary growth lever is to take market share from big competitors? Right? I mean, if you've exhausted other avenues and you're like, hey, like the market is served, we're not convincing anybody that they need this type of a product. They already know they need it. They're already being served by somebody else. And that's where my greenfield is to take market share. That's another thing. And then kind of further down, are you clear on who the villain is? Like who you're standing against, and who again is a euphemism for really what's the status quo that it's not really the actual competitor. What are you trying to change? How are you trying to make the experience in this product category better? And then can you articulate an authentic and defendable brand position, right? You're the solution to that problem. You've got the answer. Can you back that up? Well,
Shannon, this was super fruitful, and I hope those listening that this has added some, really meat to the bone of, are you a challenger brand, and what are those things that you're facing, right? So yeah, if you enjoyed this episode, please give us some love in the comments. But Shannon, this was a huge pleasure. I'm excited to keep going on this conversation of challenger brands. So
me too.
Thanks for catching this episode of the Challenger Edge podcast, where we help challenger brands like you navigate the crazy world of marketing. Like, share, and comment, or tag a fellow marketer below and let us know what we should talk about in our next episode. And we'll see you next time on the Challenger Edge podcast.